Hi, everyone. My name is Louis-Étienne Dubois. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Creative Industries at Ryerson University. And I did this research with Johanna Weststar from Western University, in which we looked at the case of live game development, so game as a service or live games, and the implications for in terms of working conditions and quality of life at work. Now, the game as a service model has been around for about 10 years. It has, however, picked up in recent years. So, unlike a traditional game as a product or kind of box game, even though it's digital, the idea behind a game as a service is just to release kind of an initial version of a game that you support for, well, forever, if there's demand. And you support it by obviously fixing what's wrong with it, and providing players with patches, but also by releasing additional content, what's called DLCs, season passes, and be it new maps, new weapons, new characters, or new missions, really. So you keep on supporting your existing fan base, your existing player base, and you do this with the idea of retaining them in your game for as long as possible, as opposed to just attracting more and more players. So that's the big shift that we're seeing now, and it's a shift that's been seen in other industries, and that's been documented as this process of transitioning from products to services under the concept of servitization. We had this opportunity to work with a large game development studio in North America. And what's interesting about this site is that the studio is in the process of kind of ramping up its development of live service games. So they gave us access to about six, not to about, to six projects, three traditional game as a product, and three game as a service projects as well. So over the course of a few weeks, we spoke to 52 game developers, a little bit more in game as a service projects because that's where we had the most questions. And not all game as a service projects were already on or kind of past their shipping or release date. So some of them were still in conception, some of them were still in a little bit more advanced production, and about half of the respondents that we spoke to were on games that were already online and that had to be supported. Our question focused on HRM practices, so obviously lots of implications for human resources, the working conditions, changes in terms of project management regime, and also, a little bit on the developer identity or what it means to be a developer working on a game as a service project. That proved to be quite rich, so we decided to write a paper that was separate and that speaks to the issues of identity and to focus here on issues of working time and on quality of life at work. So I'm not going to go too much into details here with the time that we have, but we know that work in the gaming industry is project based, and that comes with a control logic. That comes with a range of issues that have been documented. There's extensive research on the issues that come with working under a project management regime and with the iron triangle and constraints. And we also know that over time, this has become kind of normalized. This is the way games are developed. And the fact that developers take pride in this kind of grueling process in which they have to crunch for a few weeks at a time, if not a few months, and going through these endless, uh, you know, hours of overtime, oftentimes unpaid, because that's what is believed to be required to be making these gains. So if you look at a project management kind of logic on a traditional game, it just follows a classic kind of ramping up, ramping down, in which you have clear entry points for employees, for developers to come onto the projects as the project is evolving through the different stages. And you also have clear stages or instances where the developers come off the project as the project is ramping down or as shipped. And you obviously want to, you want these exit points to coincide with the entry points from another project, right? So that's how, teams are planned. And that's kind of the traditional model that has brought some sort of stability at the very least when it comes to planning for the game studio that we were working with. Now, on a game as a service model, where the release date or the shipping date is not the end, but effectively the beginning of an undetermined period of time in which the game is going to be supported and fed with additional content. So there's no ramping down, right? The players are playing the game. The game is live. The stakes are high, and you need to carry on with your team. You need to make sure that you have enough resources and developers to support that game and to embark in this kind of constant development of additional content that will be released over the coming months. So, so with no kind of end date in sight, this has obviously been quite the challenge for the video game developers. And we looked at this, sorry, for human resources. And we looked at this initially, to be honest, thinking, well, this has some potential to be quite beneficial for game developers. We know of the issues, again, when it comes to the traditional game development process under a project management regime. And we were thinking, well, perhaps not having an end date will mean not having to crunch as much, not having to force, the employees to kind of wrap everything up and, to finish up the content so that they can meet the release date. You kind of adopt a longer term approach to developing games. And if you have a good idea, then you can just circle back and put it in the game at a later date. So that's what we initially thought. We actually found quite the opposite. We actually found that it was actually even more grueling than working on a traditional game. Perhaps a little bit different intensity, not as extreme at times in terms of kind of peak and valleys, but just this constant, need to ship, which over time makes it quite exhausting. And again, this idea that there's never going to be, a downtime. The game is on, whereas on a traditional game, you could at least hope for some time in between project to catch your breath, sleep perhaps, and go back to developing the next game. So most of the changes, according to the respondents, comes from the fact that the players are front and center in a service model, and that's kind of logic. We hear a lot of customer service. Well, this is kind of customer service applied to gaming. So the development process now means, well, having to maintain the game because there are thousands, if not millions, of people playing the game. So you need to make sure that it's running and it's stable. You perhaps have to fix old issues that were introduced earlier in the development process. So you have to fix those because they're threatening the stability of the game. But you also have to, again, develop new content for the forthcoming releases of seasons or DLCs. And this is hard. And there's obviously kind of people who are used to doing certain things and have been making games in a certain way for quite some time, and just kind of having to change the process by by which games are developed and what their day-to-day activities look like is met with some resistance. It also means, again, greater work demand, smaller, more frequent deadlines. So you're not just looking at one shipping date. You're looking at multiple ones over the course of a year. You may have content coming out every 3 months or 6 months, but at the very least, you're looking at kind of smaller crunches or smaller kind of same logic in which you're trying to meet a deadline, and you're doing this with this knowing that you may have to put everything aside and to go and put out fires because the players said something, or the players demanded for something, or there was an issue in the game, and that there's an urgent matter to attend, and that's kind of how they split their time between kind of fixing the game and making sure that it's running and developing additional content. Reduced autonomy, and that's interesting because now it's no longer the developers who call the shot. Mind you, it was not all the developers that had a lot of autonomy before, but definitely now the players' needs and demands are what is guiding the development, and it also puts a lot more team, kind of changes the team dynamics, accountability, interdependency, because everything is so fragile. Everything is, again, up and running, and you don't want to be that person who kind of breaks the game, or kind of just doesn't deal with an issue that will need to be addressed down the road anyways. So teams are working together across the different kind of different experts and different disciplines, in a much closer way than on a traditional game development process. And on certain careers, because I mean the industry remains kind of dictated in terms of reputation, in career development, in terms of what you've accomplished before, what you've shipped. So those lines on your resumes that are kind of previous games that have encountered some success, the model doesn't really know, or as yet to change to account for the fact that some people will join game as a service that has already been shipped, and perhaps will work on DLCs as opposed to entirely new IPs. And it's not as many lines on a resume, and it's obviously not as perhaps prestigious to ship a map or a new weapon or a character than having been part of a team that launched this great new game that was met with a lot of raving critics and a lot of lots of sales. So, long story short, kind of our hopes were crushed, and we ended up realizing that servitization is actually kind of an additional control logic, which really adds to the what we already know with, that is problematic with the old kind of project management control logic, which is still there. And it's really about the fact that it adds this kind of player as this new kind of new variable in the equation that was already, again, always there in a way, but not in a position of influencing development, of influencing day-to-day operations, of kind of having or forcing the team to react to a range of new kind of real-time metrics about player engagement, player activity, how people are feeling. And that's just kind of on the quantitative side, because on the qualitative side, developers are also very much aware of what's being said about the game. They're reading the blogs, they're reading the critics, they're reading the meta reviews, they're all over Reddit, and so they can know, they can get their kind of finger on the pulse and know what to change in the game. It's changed again. It's changed a range of issues. So additional performativity imperatives to ensure that the players are happy and put. A lot more insistence on efficiency and accountability, but at the same time, right? Because again, efficiency and accountability, because you don't want to be the one that puts something in the game that's going to break. So you have to be extremely cautious and mindful that this is a long-term project, and that requires as such a very kind of diligent approach and a cautious approach to game development. You can't put trash in the game, but at the same time, you're always kind of reacting and having to react extremely fast to players' demands and to potential issues that are arising in the game. So it's kind of putting out fires and at the same time being slow and cautious, which makes which puts a lot of tension on the work. Project management, again, we know how it exerts control, and game as a service kind of doubles down on that, and adds accountability for the team on a longer period of time, you're in it for a long time with your team, but also having to account for kind of being responsible for the players, for the community, and making sure that they're happy and staying put. Game as a service has increased existing drivers of extreme work, right? Because none of the issues are really fixed. Work demands have increased, as we saw. Job autonomy is reduced. Um, even some developers now see. I mean, some of the words that came up were we're now redevelopers. We're no longer developers. We're just kind of tweaking the game now just to make sure that the players are happy, and that's about what we do. And it hasn't fixed the logic of kind of career uncertainty. You may have longer tenure on a given project, but you don't know if this is playing against you